The Duke of Blackwood walked into the manor with a reputation for being a monster. His face scarred and his heart supposedly made of stone. Clara's father pushed her beautiful sister, Lydia, forward, literally offering her like a piece of meat to settle a gambling debt. "Take the pretty one," the father pleaded. "She's the only one worth the gold." The Duke didn't even look at Lydia's perfect face. Instead, his eyes locked onto Clara, who was scrubbing the soot from the fireplace in the corner. He pointed a gloved finger at the girl covered in ash and said, "I don't want the prize. I want the one you treat like a servant." In that moment, the life Clara thought was over began in a way that would set the entire kingdom on fire. Clara had spent her entire life in the shadow of her sister Lydia. While Lydia wore silk and ate the finest cakes, Clara was kept in the kitchens or the attic, doing the work of 3 servants. Her father, a man who loved whiskey and cards more than his daughters, had lost everything in a high-stakes game. The winner of that game was the Duke of Blackwood, a man whispered about in dark corners for his temper and his massive wealth. When the Duke arrived to collect his debt, the house was filled with a thick, heavy tension that made it hard to breathe. Lydia stood by the piano, wearing her best blue dress and a fake smile. She was sure the Duke would pick her and take her away to a life of luxury in the city. Her father kept whispering in the Duke's ear, telling him how Lydia was the jewel of the county. He ignored Clara completely, as if she were just another piece of furniture. Clara kept her head down, trying to finish the heavy chores before she was yelled at again. She didn't expect the Duke to even notice she was alive. But the Duke, whose name was Alaric, wasn't looking at the piano or the blue dress. He walked straight past the father and the beautiful sister, his boots clicking loudly on the stone floor. He stopped right in front of Clara, who was kneeling by the hearth. He reached down and gripped her chin, forcing her to look up into his eyes. His face was rugged, with a deep scar running down his cheek, but his eyes were surprisingly calm. He saw the bruises on her wrists from where her father had grabbed her earlier that morning. The father laughed nervously and tried to pull Alaric away, saying Clara was just a spare and wasn't fit for a duke's house. He called her clumsy and slow, trying to convince the Duke that Lydia was the better bargain. Lydia herself let out a small, mean giggle, looking at Clara's dirty apron with disgust. Clara felt a familiar sting of shame, waiting for the Duke to agree and toss her aside. She had been rejected by everyone her whole life, and she expected nothing more from this stranger. Instead, Alaric dropped his hand and turned to the father with a look of pure ice. He stated that the debt was settled only if Clara came with him tonight. He told the father that a man who doesn't value what is right in front of him doesn't deserve to keep any of it. He threw a heavy bag of gold coins onto the table, but he told the father that this was the last bit of mercy he would ever receive. Lydia's face turned red with anger, and the father stood frozen in shock as the rejected daughter was chosen. Clara had nothing to pack. She walked out of the manor with only the clothes on her back and a small locket her mother had left her. Alaric helped her into a massive black carriage, his touch surprisingly gentle. As they drove away, Clara looked back at the only home she had ever known, feeling a mix of terror and a strange, tiny spark of hope. She was a prisoner of a duke now, but for the first time, someone had chosen her over her sister. She didn't know if she was going to a palace or a dungeon. The ride to the duke's estate lasted for hours. Alaric didn't speak a word, but he gave Clara his heavy fur coat when he noticed her shivering. The carriage pulled up to a castle that looked like it was carved out of the mountain itself. It was dark, imposing, and silent. As the gates shut behind them, Clara realized she was in a world where her father and sister couldn't reach her. She looked at Alaric in the dim light of the carriage, and wondered why a man who could have any woman in the world had picked the girl covered in soot. The first few days at the Blackwood estate were a shock to Clara's system. She expected to be handed a broom and told to get to work, but instead, she was met by an older woman named Martha. Martha was the head housekeeper, and she looked at Clara with a mix of pity and respect. She led Clara to a bedroom that was larger than the entire ground floor of her father's house. There were soft rugs, a bed made of down feathers, and a tub filled with warm, scented water. Clara spent the first night unable to sleep. She was waiting for the catch, waiting for the Duke to demand something she wasn't ready to give. But Alaric remained distant. He ate his meals in a separate room and spent his days in a locked study. The servants whispered that he was haunted by a war from 10 years ago and that he didn't like to be looked at because of his scars. Clara found herself watching him from the shadows, curious about the man who had bought her freedom. On the fourth day, Clara decided she couldn't stay idle. She found Martha in the kitchen and started peeling potatoes. Martha tried to stop her, saying the Duke had forbidden her from working, but Clara insisted. She told Martha that she didn't know how to be a lady, only how to be useful. Word got back to Alaric, and he summoned her to his study that evening. He was sitting in the dark, the firelight dancing off the scars on his face, making him look more intimidating than ever. He asked her why she was working with the servants when she was the mistress of the house. Clara stood her ground and told him that she wasn't a mistress. She was a girl he had bought to settle a debt. She told him that she didn't want his charity, she wanted to earn her keep. Alaric stood up and walked into the light, letting her see the full extent of his disfigurement. He asked if his face scared her. Clara stepped closer and told him that she had seen worse monsters in men with perfect faces. A small smile touched Alaric's lips for the first time. He realized that Clara wasn't like the women he usually met. She wasn't after his money, and she wasn't afraid of his darkness. He made a deal with her. She could work, but only in the library, helping him organize the thousands of books he had collected. It was a task that required intelligence, not just labor. As they worked together over the next few weeks, the silence between them turned into long conversations about history, maps, and the world outside. While Clara was finding peace, her father and Lydia were plotting. They had spent the Duke's gold in a matter of days and were now facing even more debt. Lydia was furious that her ugly sister was living in a castle while she was stuck in a crumbling manor. They started spreading rumors in the village that the Duke had kidnapped Clara and was keeping her in chains. They hoped to stir up enough trouble to force the Duke to pay them more money or to take Lydia in Clara's place. One afternoon, a messenger arrived at the castle with a letter for Clara. It was from Lydia, claiming their father was dying of a broken heart and begging Clara to come home just for 1 hour. Clara knew it was likely a trap, but the guilt she had been raised with was a powerful thing. She showed the letter to Alaric. He looked at it and then at her. His eyes filled with a deep sadness. He told her that he wouldn't stop her from going, but he warned her that some people only love you when they show up. Clara arrived at her father's manor the next morning, guarded by 2 of Alaric's strongest men. When she walked inside, she found her father sitting at the table, looking perfectly healthy. Lydia was there too, wearing a dress that was much too expensive for their situation. There was no dying father. There was only a room full of lawyers and a man Clara didn't recognize. The man was a wealthy merchant who had promised to pay off her father's remaining debts if he could have Clara instead. Her father tried to force her to sign a document that said she had been coerced into going with the Duke. They wanted to use the law to annul the Duke's claim on her so they could sell her again to the merchant. Lydia mocked her, saying that a girl like Clara could never be a real duchess and that she was doing her a favor by saving her. Clara realized that Alaric had been right. They didn't care about her life. They only cared about her value as a trade-in. Clara refused to sign the papers, standing taller than she ever had in that house. She told her father that she belonged to no one but herself, and that the Duke had treated her with more respect in a week than her father had in 20 years. Her father became violent, lunging across the table to grab her. But before he could touch her, the front door was kicked open. Alaric had followed her, unable to let her face her past alone. He didn't come with a sword. He came with a chest of documents. Alaric revealed that he had spent the last week buying up every single debt her father owed to every person in the county. He now owned the manor, the land, and even the furniture Lydia was sitting on. He told the father that he had 2 choices. He could take a small pension and move to a cottage in the north, or he could go to debtor's prison that very night. Lydia screamed that it wasn't fair, but Alaric ignored her. He walked to Clara and offered her his hand. They left the manor behind for the final time. In the carriage, Clara was shaking from the adrenaline. She asked Alaric why he had gone to such lengths to protect her. He admitted that when he first saw her in that kitchen, he saw himself, someone the world had decided was only good for what they could provide, not for who they were. He told her that he didn't buy her to own her. He bought her to set her free. The tension between them shifted into something much deeper than friendship. Back at the castle, life returned to a new kind of normal. Clara was no longer a servant or a guest. She was the heartbeat of the home. She and Alaric began to go on walks through the forest, and he started to teach her how to ride a horse. He told her about the war and how he had gotten his scars saving a group of young soldiers. Clara saw the hero beneath the monster. She realized she was falling in love with a man the rest of the world was too afraid to look at. But the merchant her father had tried to sell her to wasn't done. He was a man with connections to the king's court, and he felt insulted by the duke's intervention. He started a legal move to challenge Alaric's title, claiming that his mental state was unstable due to his war injuries. If Alaric lost his title, he would lose his lands, his wealth, and his ability to protect Clara. The quiet peace of the castle was shattered by the arrival of a royal summons. Alaric and Clara traveled to the capital to face the king's council. The city was full of people who loved gossip and hated the beast of Blackwood. Clara had to wear the finest silks and jewels, stepping into a world she never dreamed of. She was terrified of making a mistake that would hurt Alaric. At the court, the merchant and Lydia were waiting. Lydia had managed to charm her way into the merchant's inner circle, and she was ready to testify against her own sister. The trial was brutal. The merchant's lawyers painted Alaric as a violent, broken man who had kidnapped a poor village girl. They called Lydia to the stand, and she lied through her teeth, saying Clara was a simple-minded girl who didn't understand the danger she was in. She claimed the Duke forced Clara to work in the library as a form of punishment. Clara watched as the council members whispered to each other, their faces filled with judgment. Alaric sat perfectly still, his face a mask of stone, refusing to defend himself. When it was Clara's turn to speak, the room went silent. She didn't look at the lawyers or the merchant. She looked straight at the king. She spoke about the soot in her father's house and the bruises on her wrists. She told the court that the Duke didn't kidnap her. He rescued her from a life of slavery. She explained that he was the only person who had ever asked for her opinion or cared about her mind. Her voice was steady and powerful, filling the massive hall with an honesty that couldn't be ignored. The merchant tried to interrupt, but the king silenced him. Clara then did something no one expected. She pulled out the locket her mother had given her. Inside was a small seal that her father had always told her was worthless. She showed it to the king's advisors. It turned out to be the crest of a lost noble family that had been stripped of their lands generations ago. Clara wasn't just a village girl. She was the last descendant of a house that had once been loyal to the king's grandfather. This revelation changed everything. If Clara was of noble blood, her father had no right to sell her, and the Duke's purchase was technically a rescue of a noble lady. The merchant's case crumbled instantly. The king, moved by Clara's bravery and her lineage, dismissed the charges against Alaric. He went a step further and officially recognized Clara as a lady in her own right. Lydia and her father were escorted out of the court, their faces twisted in a mixture of greed and failure. After the trial, Alaric and Clara stood on the balcony of the royal guest house. The weight of the world felt lighter. Alaric told her that she was now a lady with her own standing, and she didn't need him to protect her anymore. He told her she could go anywhere and do anything she wanted. He was offering her a second chance at freedom, even if it meant he would be alone again. Clara looked at him and realized that he still didn't believe he was worthy of her love. She reached up and touched the scar on his face, her hand lingering there. She told him that she had already found the place she wanted to be. She didn't want a palace or a title. She wanted the library in the mountains and the man who saw her when she was invisible. She kissed him, and for the first time, Alaric didn't pull away. He held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. But as they prepared to return home, a shadow from Alaric's past appeared in the doorway. The man in the doorway was a soldier Alaric thought had died in the war. He was a commander who knew the truth about how Alaric had actually gotten his scars. The man wasn't there to celebrate. He was there to blackmail Alaric. He claimed that the heroic story Alaric told was a lie, and that the scars were actually the result of a betrayal that had led to the deaths of an entire company. He threatened to go to the king and have Alaric executed for treason if he wasn't paid a fortune. Clara saw the color drain from Alaric's face. He didn't deny the man's words. He told Clara to go back to the castle and forget about him. He was ready to give up and accept his fate to protect her from the scandal. But Clara knew Alaric better than he knew himself. She didn't believe he was a traitor. She stayed in the room and listened as the commander spoke. She noticed small inconsistencies in the man's story, details that didn't match the history books she had studied in the library. She spent the entire night in the royal archives, using her new status to gain access to the war records. She found a hidden report filed by a young medic 10 years ago. The report stated that it was the commander who had abandoned his post, and Alaric had been scarred while trying to cover the retreat of the abandoned men. Alaric hadn't been a traitor. He had been a scapegoat who took the blame to protect the families of the men who died, believing his life was worth less because of his injuries. Clara confronted the commander the next morning in front of the king's guard. She presented the medic's report and a list of witnesses who were still alive. The commander tried to flee, but he was captured and brought to justice. Alaric stood in shock as the truth was finally revealed to the world. He was no longer the beast of Blackwood in the eyes of the public. He was a hero who had suffered in silence for a decade. The king gave him a Medal of Honor and restored his family's full standing. They finally returned to the mountain castle, but this time the gates were thrown wide open. The servants lined the driveway, cheering for the Duke and his lady. Martha was at the front, tears in her eyes as she saw Clara. The house no longer felt like a silent fortress. It felt like a home. Alaric took Clara to the library and showed her a new section he had built while she was at the archives. It was a wing dedicated to the history of her mother's family. In the middle of the library, Alaric knelt down. He didn't have a bag of gold or a debt to settle. He had a simple gold ring and a promise. He asked Clara if she would stay with him, not as a ward or a lady, but as his wife. He told her that she was the only light he had ever known in the dark. Clara didn't hesitate. She said yes before he could even finish the question. They had both been rejected by the world, but they had found everything they needed in each other. The story ends with a quiet wedding in the castle gardens. There were no gambling debts, no soot, and no beautiful sisters trying to steal the spotlight. Lydia and her father were gone, living in a small cottage far to the north, forgotten by the world. As the sun set over the mountains, Alaric and Clara looked out at their land. The girl who was once told she was the spare was now the most important person in the kingdom. They walked into the castle together, finally free from the shadows of their past.